So the shot here that I have is a shot from a student, and they have this really cool shot here. Swinging character goes into the water. It's awesome. And they have this really nice rope animated through the scene. Very nice. Now, the problem that we're encountering here and that we're trying to solve is as the character grabs the rope, they need to be able to hold onto the rope. It'll be a nightmare to have to try and match that hand position with the rope every single frame that they're swinging. As you can see here, this is going to be a pain to do that, because if there's anything that gets tweaked on the rope, if its animation gets adjusted in any way, all of the hand positions have to be redone. Not fun. So, how do we get a character to hold on to a moving object like this, and specifically a moving object where there's no controls near where the hand is? You can see the nearest control is up here, but the blue hand down there is halfway between, which means as we bend things, it's going to just flex and shift all over the place. How do we get this to work? Well, the first solution is fairly simple. What we can do is, instead of constraining something to the controls of the rope rig, we can constrain it to the geometry, and specifically to a component of the geometry. For anyone who doesn't know, components of geometry, let me actually create a polygon here. We'll just create a cube. The components of any piece of geometry, polygon geometry, is the things that make it an object. So if I take this, right now this is a polygon cube, I'm in object mode, I'm selecting the entire object. If I right click and hold, I can switch to the different components, which for a polygon are edges, faces, and vertices. Faces are the individual sides of the object. Edges are the edges that create it, the lines. And then vertices are the separate points that everything gets connected to. So, instead of having our character hold onto the rope and constraining it to a control of the rig, we can constrain it to a component, one of these things, the face, an edge, or a vertice. Now, if we actually take a look at our rope rig here, select that, we can actually see that there are vertices right near where the hands are positioned, which is actually pretty good and lucky for us. If your object has very little geometry, this is going to be a little trickier. So, how do we do this? Well, whenever you're doing a constraint, it is always best to avoid constraining an object or a character's hands, for example, directly to whatever it is. You always want a buffer. This allows you to offset your animations and continue to animate the hands. So I'm not going to take the hand and just constrain it straight to the vertices in this case. Instead, I'm going to go to create. I'm going to create a locator. Let's bring this up here. And whenever you create things, it's good to name them, at least eventually. By the end of a process, you should never have unnamed objects. But you don't have to name them right away, especially if you don't know what exactly you're going to use them for. So this is going to be my locator to vertex. So this just is going to connect to the vertex, and it's going to be the thing that I'm going to attach everything else to. So with that in place, let me actually change the background color. If ever you need to change the background color, just hit Alt and B on your keyboard. And I'm changing this simply because it's going to be an easier color to see there. I'm also going to hide the water for now, just so we can see the locator more clearly. So, I love this song. So we need to attach this now. To do this, I'm going to right click on the rope, and I'm going to select vertex. And I'm just going to select one vertex that is close to where I need it to be. Honestly, because it's a fairly thin rope, any vertex along this edge ring, that's the ring of vertices you can see there, will be fine. So I'm going to select that. take my locator, so shift select that, go to my animation menu set, and under constrain, I'm going to go to point on poly right here. Now I'm going to open that up, and the reason I'm opening it is I want to make sure maintain offset is turned off. What this will do is make sure that the locator snaps into position right there. This locator is now constrained to that vertice. It's not constrained to any individual control, it's connected to that piece of geometry. What this means is that as we watch the scene animated, it follows along right there. But not only that, it's between two sets of controls right now. So if I move this control, you can see the locator moves. But even if I select this one, you can see it's adjusting as well, because it is attached to that point of geometry, not to any individual control. This is great, because now I can put my character's hand in that position, and I know that no matter which controls I use, it's going to stay in that position on the rope. From there, I can just constrain my character's hand to the locator here. Now, let's kind of finish the process here. I would not constrain the hand directly to this locator. Once again, I want to be able to animate this, and because this locator is constrained, I can't animate this locator. So if I constrain a hand to something that's constrained, all I've got is a bunch of locks. I don't have anything that allows me to animate. So I'm going to take this locator, and I'm just going to duplicate it right there. So now we've got another locator, and it's directly in the same position right here. I can just move this out and put it wherever I want, honestly. Let's move it in line with the wrist. And we'll rename this one. So this is going to be the hand offset locator. And the hand offset locator is essentially going to be the locator that I can use to move the hand once everything is attached. So with this locator, I usually like to have it match the alignment of the wrist, just because it makes things a little easier to animate later on. You don't always have to do this, but it's kind of nice. So I'm going to take this and let's thinking here. I'm going to take this locator and I'm going to match its position to the wrist here. To do that, take the locator, then the object you want to match to, go to modify, match transformations, and I'm just going to match all. Now the locator is lined up with that wrist, but we can't see it. Why? Because it got scaled back down. So I just need to scale it up, and you can see it's aligned with the wrist there. Now we've got that in place. I can just take my hand, constrain it to the locator. So select the locator first, the object that leads, then the object that follows. And we're going to go to constrain, and we're going to do a parent constraint this time. And apply that. Make sure maintain offset is turned on. Now the hand follows this locator right there. And I can take that locator and parent it to the rope locator right here. So just take that. I'm going to drag it into the hierarchy right there, or you can select child, then the parent, and hit P on your keyboard. And with this, the hand follows the rope. Done. There we go. And if I need to adjust anything, I can just take this locator and reposition it. Get it right on that rope there. And it follows along. There we go. Now we can add more locators to create a more complex control setup. But this is the basics of getting that to follow. Pretty simple. The core of it is using the term I'm looking for, point on poly constraint. For some reason, it just blanked out on the name there. So that point on poly constraint is going to be the core to this specific setup here. And you would just repeat the same process on the other hand. For the other hand, I would just, again, pick the vertices that are closest to that hand, and you are good to go. So, there we go. Demo done. I guess that's it. We can move on. Stream is over. Okay. No, we've got another demo here. Let's say we want to make this a little bit more complex. We want to make this more interesting. More interesting is always cool. What if we had this same scene? Rope there, character's going to swing and swing on the rope, but just use your imaginations here. The character starts up higher on the rope and they swing, and as they're swinging, they slide down the rope. So they start up high and then the rope is swinging back and forth, and they whoop, 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 right to the tip of the rope and then let go. Or maybe in this shot, they're swinging here, and instead of just letting go here, I'd have to turn off the constraint right there. That's why the arm is stretching. Instead of letting go here, by this point, they've slid down halfway, and they're just like buzzing right near the water before they fall off. How do we do that? How do we get a character to follow an object that is moving and bending and flexing? Suddenly, this becomes much more interesting. If we don't have some setup for this, it's going to be nightmare. It's going to be a horror show of trying to get your hand to follow the object and twist and bend with it. Ugh, no, it's going to be horrible. But how can we make this work? Well, let me reopen this scene here. So we just start totally fresh and see how we can do this. Now, a lot of this is going to be kind of having a knowledge of how Maya works when you do stuff like this and knowing how everything connects. And Devil Cake, welcome to the subs. Gaming Car, thank you so much for the gift. Oh, that's super generous of you. Thank you so much. We've got this. Thank you so much, Gaming Car. I really appreciate that. We've got this setup here, and we want to be able to have a character not only hold on to the rope, but we want to be able to control where exactly their hand is along the length of the rope. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to be able to do is control where along the rope our character's hand is. That's kind of the biggest point. If we don't have that, there's no way of attaching the hand in the first place. How do we do that? Well, there's something in Maya called motion trails. And motion trails work by using a curve system. So let's say I have a curve right here. I'm just going to create one. There we go. We've got a curve. And let's create an object. Polygon sphere. Right there. I want this sphere to follow this curve right here. Well, in Maya, I can take the curve and then the object, go to constrain, and we have motion paths. With this, I can attach an object to a motion path, and essentially what that does is it lines it up and animates it along that path right there. There we go. We've got an object that follows a path. Now, the way a motion path works is essentially it attaches the object to the path and then sets keys based on your timeline and animates a long path value. But what if I want to animate that myself? I don't want Maya to just set it and go at some random speed. I want to be able to control this at any point. If you take out your object, you'll have a motion path attribute right here. And you have this U value. The U value is the direction of the path. This value right here determines where along the path this object is. And it's keyed right at the beginning here and at the end here. Well, I can just delete that key right there. And now I have full control over this object on the path at any point. Right there. Aha! So, we've got this. We've got a system that allows us to have an object follow a path, and a rope really is just a path of sorts. How can we connect these together? Well, let's get rid of all of this here. The big thing that we need to do here is we've got this polygon object, and we need to have a path out of that. How? Well, there's another feature in Maya that we can use here. And that is, in Maya, you can convert objects from one type to another. You can do this by going to Modify, Convert, and you've got a whole bunch of options here that allow you to take certain elements or entire objects and convert them into something else. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take one edge along this whole object here. Now, as I'm selecting it, I don't want to select the curve up top or on the bottom of this rope. I just want the length of it. So I'm going to just deselect those areas there so we just have the straight line. And Yeti Kong, thank you so much for the sub. Oh, thank you so much. And did you start class 5 this summer? Nice. That's awesome. I look forward to seeing your work. That's so cool. So I've selected this edge all the way from top to bottom, except for the curves on the ends, because we don't want that. Now with this, I can go to Modify, Convert, and I'm going to convert this polygon edge to a curve right here. I'm just going to use its default settings. With that, we now have a curve right here. You can see it right there. This is the same thing that I used before. It was the same curve. Now, the cool thing with this curve is that it has what's called construction history in Maya. Construction history basically means that there's a history of things that are connected, essentially. So in Maya, it's created this curve, but that curve knows that it's still connected to this polygon right here. What does that give us? Well, it means that the animation on the polygon transfers to our curve. So our curve is still connected to that object. It still follows along. I can place this wherever I want, and it still is going to be animated. Now, I don't want to move this in any random place. Instead, I'm going to take this curve, and I'm just going to nudge it so that it is in the exact center of the polygon here. So I'm just, exact being a very loose term, close center. So something like this. You can see that curve is now in the middle of the rope. And it follows along. Great. Okay. We've got that. Now, we need something to follow this rope. This is going to be essentially the control that we use that will allow us to have everything else built on top of it. You can kind of think of it as the point that the hand is going to hold. And we want that to be something that we have full control of. So for this, you can use any object that you want. I'm going to use a polygon object for this, just so we can kind of see each object differently and it doesn't get confusing later on. So I'm going to create a polygon, and let's create a platonic solid, just for the sake of it. So we've got this platonic solid here, and then let's rename this. Always good to rename things. And let's call this rope follower. So this is going to be just the object that follows the rope. And we've got our poly to curve here. Let's rename that. And this is going to be our rope curve. Okay. So I want my rope follower to follow the rope curve. So I'm going to select both of those here, go to constrain, and then once again, we've got our motion paths. Let's attach this object to a motion path right there. Aha. Now our rope follower is going to follow that rope. And you can see that it's going just up along the rope because once again, the motion path is animated by default. All I have to do is delete this U value, delete all the keys on it. And now I can control this and essentially just place it exactly where the hand is going to reach and grab right there. And it follows along. And at any point I can slide up or down. And you can imagine if the hand was constrained to this, the hand would just follow up and down along with it. Ta-da! Done. But is it really done? we can go a little further with this. So with this alone, this gives us that control to do a lot of cool things. But in terms of constraining the hand directly to this, we're going to run into some issues. Namely, we can't animate this object itself. We can't rotate it. We can't translate it. You can see all of the attributes are connected. That's what the yellow means. They are connected to something else. That means if we want to add a rotation in there or a twist, can't do it with this object. Secondly, it's a pain to animate this motion path in here. It just really is. You keep having to go in here, and it is very, very finicky. What I mean by finicky is the value of this object, or of this attribute, I should say, has a max setting of 0 to 1. 0 being the end of the curve, and then 1 being the top of the curve right here. So 1 and then 0. You can see right there. And then everything along that length is going to be just a fraction of that, 0 to 1. This means that as I scrub through this, it is very hard to get an exact value. You can see how it's just snapping around. I can't get that finesse in there. So how can we get more control there? There's a whole bunch of things that we want more control over. How do we do that? Well, let's go through that. And actually, I should point out another thing, because this is another common issue that you might run into, is as this is constrained to the rope, all it's trying to do is follow it as closely as possible. It is not set up for animation the way we want it to be. And what I mean by that is, look at the axes of this. So you see how the blue axis, the Z here, is pointing screen left right now. As I move this up, and we'll see if this happens here, you will often have times, actually, it might be when we're animating here. Yeah. So you'll see it's pointing screen left. And now as it's going through, now it's pointing screen right. Right there. It's rotating. This is because as the curve is bending, Maya is trying to calculate and follow it along, and it doesn't care about world axes, it's caring about precision. And that's spinning this object around all over the place. If we were to constrain the hands directly to this, your hands would be spinning and twisting around the rope. You'd have to counter animate that. Ugh, nightmare. No, we don't want that. We want a simple just hold on to the rope, and at most, just a little twist here and there. That's it. So we've got a solid base here. We've got the hands following. Now we need to make it animatable and something that we can work with much more easily. And there's a question here. If you reanimate the rope, will the rope curve follow? Yep. That's the beauty of this. If I change this, all there. So at any point I can reanimate the curve, make any adjustments, and it's all updated. Okay, so let's start addressing some issues. The first issues I want to address are making sure that I can remove that extra layer of rotation, because that's just going to mess up my animation. And then I want to add a way to easily animate this slide up and down the rope. Okay. I also want something that's a little easier to see than this polygon geometry. This is a good placeholder, but eventually we're not going to want to see this. So let's create a NURB circle. I'm going to create a control curve, essentially, that we can use to have all of our connections built in onto. So I'm going to create this NURB circle here. And let's see. Just thinking how I want to set this up. We've got our NURB circle. This is going to be our control. We also need another object. And the other object is going to be essentially the thing that removes that extra rotation. I could technically use the NURB circle to do that, but I want the NURB circle to be my main controller. which means I don't want to have constraints and things set up on it. So we're going to keep this here for now. It's going to come in handy in just a second. But I need a object here to constrain to this. Now I could use anything. So for now, let's use a locator just so we can see something visual. But then I'm going to show you another trick afterwards. So we've got a locator here. And this locator is going to be used to follow this object, but remove that extra rotation. To do this, all we need to do is constrain the locator to the object. So we're going to create a parent constraint here. So select the object, then the locator, go to constrain parent. And what we want to do is just not constrain the x-axis. If you look at this rotation here, see how the rotate x, this is the thing that's causing the spinning on this object right there. If I make sure to constrain this locator to this object, but don't have a connection to the x-axis, let's do this and make sure maintain offset is turned off so it snaps right there. You can see it follows along. Everything's working. But as this object rotates on X, that's that weird spin that we were getting, the locator doesn't follow. It'll follow everything else, just not that spin. Now, as the rope swings, if we watch that X or that Z line right there, you can see it always points screen left. That's what we want. No spinning. So essentially we just use this locator to get all of the main motion, but not the one that was causing issues. So let's do that again, just do it more quickly, and I'll show you a different way, because essentially this is just a placeholder, a way to remove an axis of motion. We don't need to see this. We're never going to touch it. We're not going to animate this. It's just there for being there. And honestly, I can take this and then hide the visibility on it and whatnot. But there are times when you just want to have an object in your scene that doesn't actually exist. It's just there. It's just a connection. A way you can do that is if you have nothing selected, you can hit Control G. That is edit group right here. And if there's nothing selected, instead of adding a group, it's going to create a null object. A null object is basically just an object that has no geometry. It has no visual components to it. It is just that. It is just a thing. So I can take this here and use it to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to take my object here, take my null object in the outliner, and then I'm going to create that same constraint right there. And my null object is now acting like that hub for me right there. And let's call this our, let's see, what do I want to call it? Spin remover. There we go. And Jupit, thanks so much for the sub. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Hey, 17 months. Jeez, thank you so much. So with this, we've got that spin out of the way. Great. Now we can take our NURB circle here, and I essentially just want to have this follow along. And because we already have the spin remover, that null object following everything that we need, I can just parent this to the null object, and there we go. But before that, I do want to make sure that my positions are matching. So I'm going to take my NURBS circle here, select my spin remover, go to modify, match transformations, match that. I'm going to have to scale it back up here. And now it's lined up with the rope. But you'll notice that it's kind of lined up in the wrong direction. We can fix that in just a second. With this in place now, I can just take my NURB circle, parent it to the spin remover right there. And then you'll notice that my attributes have all zeroed out. This is because since we matched the transformations exactly to our spin remover, because it's parented, they line up and there's no offset, so everything is zeroed out. Very nice. The reason this makes it easy is now I can just take my rotate Z, go 90 degrees, and it's lined up exactly with my rope there. Like that. Now we have a control curve that follows the rope. It doesn't have that extra spin, and I can use this to see exactly where the hand will be held. There we go. Aha. So, with this in place, we've got all this. Great. We still need an ability to control the up and down along the rope. A way to have this slide along the rope without having to select this object that we're not going to be using, go into the motion path, find the U value. That's a pain. We don't want to have to do that. So, what do we do? Well, I can take my NURB circle. Let's call this the rope slide control. And I'm going to add an attribute to it. So I'm going to take this rope, go to modify, and I'm going to go add attribute. And this is going to just give me a new attribute that I can use to create my own connections and animate things in my own ways that I want. So let's call this rope. What do I want to do it? Let's call it rope slider. And I'm going to make sure it's a float. A float is basically a value that has decimals. Vector is 3 values. You have booleans on off. String is text. Enumeration is a list. Integer is whole numbers only, 1, 2, 3, 4. We want a float. That's a value that is a number with decimal points, 1.263 if I want to. So we'll create a float, rope slider. Boop. There we go. We have our rope slider attribute right there. Now, what I want is that this rope slider attribute should control the U value here. This way I can just select this control and use this attribute right there to move things up and down. How do we do that? Well, there's a lot of different ways. I'm going to use the connection editor for now. So the connection editor allows you to connect one attribute to another. So I'm going to select my curve here. I'm going to make sure that's loaded on the left. And we'll see if I scroll all the way down, there's our rope slider attribute. And I want to connect this from the left side to the right side. Now, what's on the right side? Well, we need our motion path right here. We need to load that. But if I select this and hit reload right, there you go. Selects that and puts that in. The big thing you want to do is don't select just the object and hit reload right. You'll see that just loads in a rope follower. You need to select your motion path and then reload that. And I want to find my U value here, which I believe is up axis, U value right there. Boop. There we go. And you can see U value turns yellow. That shows that it's connected to something else. In this case, rope slider. And where's our object? Right at the bottom here. The reason being, our rope slider value is set to 0. If I take this and move it up, there we go. We have that object and it is connected, and we can now use this to move it up or down. There's still a problem though, and that is the sensitivity is too high. And Najim, thank you so much for the sub. Aw, thank you so much. So the sensitivity is too high here. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. The sensitivity is too high, so it means that if I don't hold down control, which I'm doing right now, holding down control slows down the value changes on your sliding here. If I don't hold down control, you can see it just popping all over the place. That's a pain to animate, especially if you want the character to like slide down the rope and there's a point where it's like, and they're like just doing these small little like drops along the rope before slide down really fast. This is going to be a pain. So, how do I get more control on this? How do I get that finesse in there? Well, we just need a little bit of math. essentially we have one control connected to another. And you can imagine it kind of an arrow pointing from one to the other. Rope slider is going into the U value. What we need to do is add a little bit of math to increase the sensitivity, where a value of 1 on the rope slider is multiplied to be 100 or just a decimal of it. We increase that sensitivity. How do we do that? You can go to Windows and open up the node editor. The node editor shows all the connections in Maya for your objects. And with the rope slider ring selected, I'm going to graph this out. So I'm going to hit this button right here. It's the box with the 2 arrows. This will show the inputs and the outputs of this object right here. Now it's going to be a little bit messy, but essentially we're looking for our motion path right here and our control, which is, oops, don't double click on that. We want our rope slide right there. So we've got rope slide right here. Let's open this up. And you can see that our rope slider attribute is being put into the U value right there. Yay. Let's make a little bit of math happen here. So I'm going to hit tab. This will open up the search bar here, and I can just type in multiply. I'm going to add a multiply divide node here. Essentially what this allows me to do is multiply one value and output the result. So I'm going to take my rope slider. I'm going to plug this into input 1x here. And then I'm going to output that value, so output x, into my U value. And you can see we're just pumping some new information in here. Okay. Now, the way the multiply divide node works is if you put something into input 1x, it'll multiply or divide it by value input 2x, and then the result is output x right there. So here we have input 1x. It is being multiplied by this value right here, input 2x. And I'm going to multiply it by 0.01. This will make that value, if it's a value of 1, it'll output 0.01. It'll be much more precise. Okay, so let's try this now. I've got my rope slider here. Let's move it up, and I'm not holding control now. Look how much control I have. That precision right along that rope. If I hold down control now, look how precise I get that. And essentially, what's happening is we've got a value of 32.94 right here. It goes through, it's multiplied, and we are exporting a value of 0.3294. So we have increased the sensitivity of this control enormously, and now we can just animate this with butter smoothness. It is going to be wonderful. So we've got that set up. Yay! Good. Now what? Well, let's see here. Gotta remember what the next step is. So we've got that parented, we've got our control in place. At this point, really, we just need to create our locator setup to have the object or the hands follow the object. Now, before I do that, I do want to hide this polygon. It's just getting in the way. We don't need to see it. It's just there. So to hide this, I'm going to either, you can just turn off the visibility right there, or you could go into the attribute editor, go to display, drawing overrides, and turn off the visible right there. So you enable the override, turn that visible off. This is kind of a more make sure that an animator who opens a scene doesn't accidentally turn this on kind of thing. But for yourself, just turning off the visibility is fine. Okay, so we've got that. We've got our control ring right there that we can use to slide up and down. At this point, we just need to get the hands to follow. So once again, this is just going to be creating some locators. Now, because we have this ring and we don't have any constraints on it, one nice thing about this is we already have a control that I can spin around the center of the rope. So imagine I hold on to something and I want to spin the hand around it, just like that, to readjust the position right from the center. I have that ability right here with this control ring. So that's really good right there. But I do want a few more controls. So I'm going to create a locator and boop, right there. We're going to create a locator in the center of the control ring here. So let's take this locator. I'm going to match it to the control ring. So select the locator, then the ring, modify, match transformations. I'm just going to match all and then scale up the locator a little bit there. There we go. So now we've got a locator right through the center. Maybe make it a little smaller right there. This is basically something that we can use to add a little offset to the hand, tweak its position a little bit right there. So we have that. Let's parent that to our rope slide control. So now I select the rope slide control. It moves. Locator moves with it. If I need to add an offset, I can just push it there. It follows along. There we go. Okay. And then to connect the hand to it, I'm going to have another locator. So create locator. And I'm going to take this one way down there and match it to the hand position, the wrist. So select the locator, then the hand. Modify, match transformations. Let's scale that up a little bit bigger. So this is going to be essentially the locator that controls the hand, so that when we're constrained, we can still animate the hand however we want. So let's actually name these. We'll call this hand locator and rope locator. So with this, I've got all that in place. The hand locator will be parented to the rope locator, so it follows that. If I move this around, you can see it follows along. And then the hand will be constrained to the hand locator. So I'll select the hand locator, then the IK control, constrain, parent. And let's double check our options. Make sure we have rotate set to all. And let's add that in. Now I can take this control and adjust the position of the hand wherever I want it to be. Get that to be right in the center there. If I need to adjust the hand position from the center of the rope, I can do that with this locator. So now I have this nice simple twist. If I need to do a global hand rotation, I can do it from here, right there. So you can see I have full control over this and to get very precise motions, either from the center of the rope or from the wrist or a global spin. And all of it is animated, so it follows along right there. It'll update to any changes I do to the rope. And at any point, if I need to adjust the position up or down, I can just take my rope slider and tweak that, and the hand goes through. Now you'll notice at this point the hand's pulling away. That's because the IK is stretching too far. But you can see the actual control follows along. If I was to bring the character up, it would stay on the rope. Well, I can just show it here. Let's bring the character up. Beep. There we go. Hand on the rope. So there we go. We've got our setup that allows us to have the hand follow along at any point. So, with all of this, let me do this all one more time so that you can see it kind of all the way through and without all the explanation. This way, if anyone wants to rewatch this, you don't have to listen to the whole explanation once again. Okay, so let me reopen the scene. And recent files, that's what I'm looking for. Okay. Yeah, you definitely want to keep it simple. If you don't need this slide attribute, don't do all of this. It's not necessary. If you just need the hand to hold the rope, quick constraint with the point on poly, done. But if you do need the hand to follow the rope, if you need to have a character pulling on a rope and it's sliding through their hands or anything like that, doing something like this and learning how to do something like this is going to make your life a whole lot easier in the polish phase than if you're trying to just match the position and then you adjust the rope and you have to redo all the animation on your hands. That is a nightmare. So let's go through the process once more, but I'll just do it straight ahead and we'll just go through the steps without too much explanation. So first off, I want to select an edge loop on the rope here. I don't want the very tips because that's just going to mess up the curve. So I'm going to deselect those. With the edge selected, I'm going to go to, I said that weird, I'm going to go to modify, convert polygon edges to curve. We're going to take our polygon curve here, and I'm just going to nudge it to be in the center of the rope. This just makes sure that all of our motions will rotate from the center instead of from an edge right there. Okay, so that's in place. I'm going to create a polygon primitive right here. And I'm going to attach this to our curve. So select the two of them, the polygon primitive and the curve. Go to constrain, motion paths, attach to motion path. The object follows along, but it's animated. So we're going to open up our motion path attribute right here and delete the animation on the U value. Select that, right click, delete selected. This allows us to now animate and adjust the U value manually ourselves. Right there. Okay. Now, we need to create a object to remove the weird rotation that's going to happen whenever you have an object onto the curve. So I'm going to hit Control G with nothing selected to create a null object. I'm going to take this null object and constrain it to our geometry. So constrain parent, but I'm going to make sure that I don't constrain the rotate X axis. And I'm also going to make sure that maintain offset is turned off right there. This snaps the null object to that primitive and we remove that twist. It'll just follow along, but without that one axis in place. Now, at this point, I can take my null object and attach things to it. So I'm going to create a NURBS circle. This is going to be our control curve. I'm going to match its position to the null object. So take our NURBS circle, null object, modify match transformations right there. I'll need to scale it up a little bit. Something like that. And then I'm going to parent our NURBS circle to the null object. When that's done, you'll notice that the attributes zero out. This is because their positions are matching exactly. I can just take my rotate Z, set it to 90 degrees in this case. Now we've got a control ring around our rope. I don't need to see our polygon anymore, so let me turn off the visibility. With this in place, I need to add the control in order to properly animate the slide up and down the rope. So I'm going to take my NURBS circle, go to modify, add attribute. Let's call this rope slider. You notice that I'm not naming things. Be sure to name things as you go, like I mentioned in the previous demo. So rope slider, hit OK. With the rope slider created, we can now go to our connection editor, Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor, and use this to connect the rope slider attribute to the U value attribute. So to do this, I'm going to select my NURB circle, reload left, select the rope slider attribute right there, take my polygon geo, select the motion path, and reload that on the right, and then attach the rope slider up into the U value right here. This will connect them one to one, but we want to have a little bit more finesse and control on there. So with this now all set up, I can take my NURB circle, go to Windows, Node Editor, and I'm going to graph it out. And I'm just going to open up the connection right here and add a multiply divide node. Just hit tab, type in multiply divide right there. And you will want to tablet's not double clicking here. There we go. You will want to attach the rope slider into input 1x right there. Take your output x, tie that into the U value. So we're just adding this extra node in, and then set your input 2x to a decimal value. Something like 0.01 will give you a lot of control. With that, we can now take our curve here, use our rope slider, and slide it into place right there. Now I'm just going to set up the constraint. At this point, we've got all of the controls following. Everything's perfect in that sense. I can just place this where I need it to be and create our locators to create our constraint so that the hand follows along. So I'm going to go to create locator right there. The first one I'm going to match to the control curve right there. So I'm going to select the locator, then the control curve, modify match transformations right there. And then I'm just going to parent it to that NURB circle. I'm going to create another locator. This one I'm going to match to the wrist position, modify freeze transformations, match all transforms, and then scale it up and parent that to the first locator. Now I can just take the wrist and constrain it to the locator that's in its position. So I'll select the wrist locator, then the IK control, constrain, parent, and make sure that your options are all reset there. Add that. There we go. We've got a hand that follows the rope. Now, what if we want to do it for the second hand? We would repeat some of the process. We don't have to make a new control curve because we've already got that control curve. I'll just call this hand 1 right here. Since we already have a control curve, we just have to start from the polygon object. So I would just create another polygon primitive right here. Let's do another platonic solid right there. Scale it up. Select our curve, constrain, motion path, attach to motion path. And once again, you repeat the whole process for the other hand. And now you're going to have 2 control rings on there for both hands, and you can slide them both up and down the rope however you want and have full control on both hands. So that's pretty much it. So I hope that was helpful. I hope it was interesting. I hope it wasn't too confusing. I know especially stuff like this is digging into a lot of aspects of Maya that as animators we don't normally look at, and that's a whole other area. That's not what we do typically. But I will say that by learning stuff like this, by exploring this, and you don't have to go as in-depth as this, even just understanding how constraints can work, how a point-on-poly constraint works compared to a parent constraint versus a point constraint. All of these things are going to help you just have more solutions to things. Because it is very... There's situations that if you know how to do certain things like this, it can take something that would normally be a nightmare to animate and just have like you're just gonna have gray hairs so quickly, to literally one slider, whoop, the hand's down, I'm done. And if I need to make an adjustment, it's done for me. So it can really speed things up. Now, I see a lot of people saying, like, you'll have to watch this again twice. Yes, things like this, it's normal to have to rewatch 3, 4, 5 times. When I was learning stuff like this, I would forget by the second time I try it. It's like, okay, what the heck? Follow along again. Try to understand it. But the biggest thing is just trying it and practicing with it. And it can help quite a bit over time. So if anyone has questions on this, definitely let me know. Let's see, been trying the constraint way you mentioned in the beginning, and the only thing I've managed so far is the rig exploding. Let's see, the constraint method, do you mean the very first one with the point on poly, or just the straight constraint, the parent constraint? If the rig is exploding, it might be the direction that you're constraining things into. Whenever you're constraining, you want to make sure that you are constraining, or you're selecting the object that leads first, and then the object that follows second, and then create your constraint. If you do it backwards, it'll constrain the wrong way and could cause the rig to not work anymore. The other thing you want to make sure to do is that you never parent anything directly with the rig. There should always be a constraint there. So for example, the rig's IK control here, I constrained it to the locator. I didn't parent it to the locator. If you parent it, it's going to break the rig. But if there is something specific you have a question about on any constraint stuff, definitely let me know. I'd be happy to go over that. So, with all of that, I think that pretty much concludes the demo. Hey, it only took about an hour. That's not bad for me. Usually my demos end up going like 3 hours with so many tangents and interruptions on my part. I actually managed to focus for once. Wow. Let's see. Surway did a great video on reversing constraints with Thor's hammer and animating the constraint as well. Saves time, which means it saves money. Exactly. Yeah, Sir Wade has some really good videos on that. What about detaching the hands from the rope? So with the constraint set up, to detach the hand from the rope, all you would need to do is animate your blend parent right here. So you'll notice that the hand right now is following the rope. If I wanted to let it go, I would just turn off the blend parent. Boop, it's off. Want it back on the rope? Blend parent on. Boop, there we go. Now it follows along right there. Ta-da! So it's really just animating that attribute. And this goes for any constraint. If you have a character holding onto something and the object is constrained in their hand, just set a key on that object and then turn the blend parent on and off, or the blend attribute. The parent depends on what type of constraint it is. If it was a point constraint, you would have a blend point. If you had a scale constraint, it would be blend scale. The blend attribute essentially allows you to switch from the constraint, or sorry, the object following the constraint, or the object following your keys, the animation on it. So at 1, it is following the constraint. I switch it to 0. Now it is following the keys that I set myself manually. To turn off the constraint completely, just deactivate it completely, you would go down here and you'll have the weight of the constraint. So here is our locator. That's this object right here, locator 2. Locator 2 weight. So the weight is how strong the constraint is. You can turn this on or off, and this will essentially make it that the constraint is completely deactivated. Personally, I prefer to animate the blend because it's part of the main attributes here. So if I set keys, right there, you can see it gets keyed. So here it's like that, set a key, everything is keyed. This one is not keyed unless you click on it and key it yourself. I don't like that personally because there's going to be a point where I forget and I suddenly am missing keys or haven't turned something on or off or something like that. The blend is just a little bit more powerful, at least for animation. Now, Do you have any plans to see the new Chip and Dale movie? Have I seen it? I haven't seen it. I don't know if I have plans for watching it or not. If I get the chance, I probably will, but I'm probably not going to go out of my way for it. I don't know. It's not that I don't like it or don't like the idea of it. It's just not my type of movie. For example, I haven't seen any of the new Disney live action, The Lion King, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast. I haven't seen any of those. There's nothing wrong with them, and whether they're good or bad, it's more just that I don't have a inclination to watch that. I've got a lot of other shows that I would rather specifically seek out. But if I sat down and it was there, I feel like I would enjoy watching it. It seems interesting, and I really loved Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. Rescue Rangers? I think so. When I was young. I used to watch it in French. So it was Tic et Tac Ranger au risque. Ranger au risque. So, yeah, very different. Let's see. Can we do this demo with Animbot? You definitely can. If you have Animbot, you can definitely use that as well. It's really whichever tools you have access to. And you can also do this with other software programs, I'm sure. I'm sure Blender has similar things that you can do with this. They'll be named differently, and you might have to do them in slightly different orders, but it is essentially just using the tools in Maya or in whichever program to create a setup that works for you and simplifies your life. So, let's see. So if the character lets go of the rope, you turn the blend parent off, but need to manually put the hand back to the last position it was. Yeah, so you do a switch. So the character's reaching for the rope, you'd animate that, and then they grab the rope and you turn the constraint on. And then as they let go, they pop off, and then you'd have to put the hand in place and then move it away. So you do have to have a little bit of a transition there. The other way you can animate the transition, because transitions are always a pain when you do them over a very narrow amount of space. So if the character's grabbing the rope very gently, so they grab on, hold on, and then you turn the blend on off, you're going to notice a little pop. And those are hard to fix and clean through your shot. I hate having to do that because there's always going to be a little bit. Whenever you do a switch like this, it's the same with FK-IK switching. Any type of switch from one set of controls to another, when you're changing the rotation order of an object, you want to do it at the fastest point. So whenever the hand or object is moving at its fastest, it makes it easier to hide that transition. So instead of waiting for the hand to just grab the rope, especially if it's slow, if the hand is moving in and then slows down, I will turn the blend parent on earlier, and then, so turn the blend parent on, and then use the locator here to finish animating the hand grabbing the rope, and then they go to swing. So I'm switching that early and then just using my offset control that I already built in, and no one's going to see the transition because the offset control already follows the rope here. So it'll be fine and it'll just smooth as silk. So yeah, always try to make your transitions when something moves quickly, not when it's stopped. You can do it when it's stopped. It's just a nightmare to clean up.